Great, thank you very much. Let me just get my slides up. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's exciting that you put all this together. There's so much going on. How do I get my? Sorry, I just can't see. I can't click on the. There we go. Okay. Well, thanks again. So my name is Jeff Geipel. I'm with the Mining Shared Value Initiative of Engineers Without Borders Canada, though I live in the UK actually. We're a nonprofit initiative focused on helping and pushing the mining sector to increase local procurement of goods and services where they operate. So there's our social media links. We're a nonprofit convener and advocate think that we're trying to help all the global mining system and in individual countries increase local procurement. And that's because local procurement is the biggest economic lever, or potential one, I should say, in terms of creating economic development. And that also has giant implications for social license to operate and ESG. So this is just a stat which I think is really amazing, and to be honest, hasn't, you know, we need more of these stats, and this hasn't been sort of made in a while. This is from the World Gold Council. This is looking at all their in-country spending by their member companies in 2013, which is the last time they put this together. And you can see that 71% of all in-country payments actually go to procurement from goods and service providers. So, you know, we're spending a lot of time when it comes to ESG and transparency and taxation debates. We're really focusing on the taxation and some of the other risks, but procurement really is the biggest potential lever for economic development, and that obviously means it's a big lever for social license to operate. And so obviously people who are, you know, logged in today know this kind of stat, but this is the third year in a row that the EY survey of company executives found that social license to operate was the #1 risk for the mining sector. So, you know, again, this is critical right now more than ever. And then when we were speaking about procurement of the services, the coronavirus hit, and this is just a indicative image of what the world woke up to in terms of how reliant everybody was on imports from around the world, and the mining sector was no different. Many mining companies were cut off from goods and service providers, particularly service providers, obviously, because if they were international firms, they couldn't travel to a country like Ghana or Kenya for that matter. So this has really caused a re-envisioning of supply chains and the recognition of the value of having local suppliers in country. So on top of that, the other kind of push factor in terms of why procurement is a huge issue that companies should get right, and stakeholders who work with mining companies should work with them to get right, is that it's being regulated. So we've got new laws in several African countries in the last sort of 3 or 4 years that require local procurement by the companies. Right now, there's a few other countries in the process. Senegal right now is working on finalizing their regulations, so is Zambia. And while this was originally a very Africa-focused phenomenon, we are now seeing local content requirements being placed in Latin America as well, and Saudi Arabia as another example. So this is really a global movement. And then any company who operates in Canada or Australia will know about the requirements for community development agreements. They have different names in different countries, but CDAs generally. And of course, this means that you must have agreements with local indigenous communities, and local procurement is always part of those requirements. So again, these are a paradigm shift in terms of regulation. And we are seeing now governments realize they need to also match these requirements with supplier development. So you have seen quite a number of new supplier development initiatives from governments in Chile and Tanzania, as just a couple examples. So what I want to offer today in terms of a tool and how we can manage this better is basically measurement. It seems fairly obvious that we need more measurement of this issue, local procurement, like any other issue. But the reality is that despite a whole decade of regulations and increased attention on this issue, we don't actually have much in the way of public measurement systems. The local procurement is not a part of the EITI standard, even though it's very important to know that many countries are starting to request this anyways as part of sort of voluntary agreements between companies. And as I alluded to, all those mining countries, they've got new regulations, but you don't see what actually happened. There's no yearly report showing how local procurement by the mining sector has increased or decreased in the years following those regulations. So, we haven't really got to the place yet where we have a real good measurement system, aside from a few individual cases. And that's a big problem because we don't, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? That's an obvious point. Likewise, community development agreements mostly remain confidential, so we don't see the results in those situations. And all of this is leading to the fact that the companies are, in fact, missing the mark on local procurement. And this is, one, it's causing social license problems, and two, it's leading to further government regulation. If the companies do not succeed at local procurement initiatives, they will get regulated in many of these cases. And again, when it comes to the power of reporting and measurement, and we know this because, we look at the safety example. Health and safety is an example where there's been a drastic improvement of numbers and reduced injuries and deaths. And that's largely in a context in many cases where it's really a voluntary situation, right? If you're in many countries, yes, it doesn't help your reputation, but the reality is, sadly, that there isn't actually a real legal consequence in many countries for health and safety problems. And so, yet despite that, with the sort of omnipresent health and safety reporting and measurement, and we have seen improvement across the sector. So we do know that measurement and voluntary reporting work. That leads us to the tool that we're kind of here to present today, which is a fully free and publicly available tool, which we created with GIZ, the German Development Agency. It's called the Mining and Local Procurement Reporting Mechanism, or LPRM. And it's available in French and Spanish. The French acronym and hashtag is MREL. And what we're here is to offer, essentially a set of disclosures that we want the mining sectors to use to talk about local procurement. It's really just a set of practical information on local procurement practices and results that we hope all mine sites will provide, again, to improve their own practices, but also to empower host country suppliers and stakeholders. And so here's a few examples of just sort of the kind of policy that a mining company has on local procurement, who's accountable for local procurement, how are major contractors like EPCM service providers incentivized. So we're really just trying to get the information out there. Here's an example of a company using it. We've now got four companies who've officially adopted the LPRM and have come out with the reports, and we've got two more about to. So we actually hope to hit about eight companies using this by the end of the year. This is Lundin Gold in Ecuador. You can see they are reporting all their local procurement spending, where it's going, and that's really exciting. It's helping them manage things better. It's also helping inform better policies. So that's just an example. And then you can see here it kind of created an index very similar to the Global Reporting Initiative in the report. What we really want to do is get to the point where mining companies are providing this really practical information on supplier development. Now Freeport, the American company, is not using the LPM quite. They're almost there, but this is a really great example of the kind of public information they have on their supplier practices, their supplier code of conduct. And I think companies should look at following this lead, because if companies do not have this kind of information publicly available, it just leads to resentment and conflict. And frankly, if there's no information, the vacuum is filled by allegations of corruption and favoritism and that kind of thing. So we're trying to help the sector get better on that one. So again, in terms of trying to help everybody manage this issue better, we're trying to get the information out there to help that. And the other angle, which I kind of finished with, is this ESG pressure, and why you should care about local procurement as an issue, and procurement in general, is we are seeing huge pressure on supplier due diligence around the world, and it's coming from regulation, it's coming from high-profile incidents. So a Canadian company that has now since been bought by a Chinese company was sued in Canadian court, and actually went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was going to be heard in Canadian court, which is the first time that's pretty much happened. And it's because they had bought labor from a construction services provider in Eritrea that was linked to the military, and there was forced labor. So you can end up in court essentially for your supplier's actions. So we are seeing a big focus on this. World Gold Council now has a public supply chain policy requirement for their responsible gold mining principles. So again, we are seeing pressure for companies to provide information on how they manage this risk. And likewise, the ESG ratings agencies who score you and affect your capital access, these are the kind of questions they're asking now. They are asking companies about vendor codes of conduct and sort of how you manage supplier due diligence. So our message is you might as well get ahead of this, because the ESG rating agencies and investors are asking about what you're doing on procurement to ensure you're not purchasing from problematic suppliers. So lastly, just a little resource. We've made a brief that shows you sort of how local procurement is covered in all the various other standards like the GRI, responsible gold mining principles, the ICMM's performance expectations. And so I can provide a link in the chat to that after. And I'll just lead before we get to the questions that, the pressure on the mining sector to increase local procurement is not going away. So I suppose, it's something that mining companies can complain about, but it's not going away. So why not try to create some business value out of it? Why not try to get more access to capital by increasing your reporting? And this is the largest economic impact. Let's get it right. And lastly, I'll say that we have so many initiatives going on, government regulations and standards. So we're trying to help everybody align on this issue. So I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jeff. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the wonderful Jeff Geipel. Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jeff. So with this, and actually kind of building on the conversation we were just having with Francis, Jeff, what's your background?
My background, I'm actually I work for Engineers Without Borders, but I'm not smart enough to be an engineer. I'm a policy guy. So I did my background in international development, international trade, political economy, that kind of thing.
Fantastic, because the reason I ask is, of course, this conference seems to have been dominated by geoscientists, and it's almost a problem because we realize we all see the world from a very similar perspective. So with regards to all of this, and I know that actually Tim and Michael's talk that's just coming up next is going to complement what you've just said incredibly well, because they're talking about beneficial ownership. With regards to this, one of the common questions that I certainly get is, if you are, say, for example, you are a cobalt and copper mining company in the DRC, you're being bombarded by questionnaires, audits, etc. on ESG from your customers, investors, other random NGOs, etc. the entire time. What can we be doing to try and align some of that? And I ask that with the twist that, of course, the reason for a procurement specialist asking for information, the purpose of that is different to, say, an investor. Mm-hmm. So asking questions from different directions. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say put it on paper. I mean, this is why we get frustrated sometimes, because mining companies kind of complain about the reporting burden, but it's only a burden if you don't manage it well. If you do a really great job, for example, by using the LPRM on procurement, you write it all down, you have this great reporting system done, you have your website updated, and then every ESG ratings question, you say, look at the website. I mean, rather than fill out questionnaires one by one and ad hoc, why not do it all at once? And I guess, what we've been saying is we've mapped out all the standards that are used by the mining sector. So essentially, if you use the LPRM, you will be providing all the information that is requested by everybody, from governments to ESG rating agencies to standards like IRMA or the RGMPs. So, it makes sense to just sort of do some homework, get everything done on paper for the first time, and then it'll save time in the long run. So we would say that for the LPRM, but I mean, I would imagine you did a very similar dynamic across many issues, right? It's putting some upfront work will save a lot more time down the road anyways.
Brilliant, thanks for that. And I mean, the other thing as well is, of course, it's almost the impetus to go ahead and do a lot of this in part comes from government regulation. So say, for example, in the UK and the Modern Human Slavery Act, which then, of course, 2 years ago, 3 years ago in Australia, it then went in there. So you're beginning to see this cascade effect. Do you see most companies only doing this when they absolutely have to? With one or two kind of getting ahead of the curve, or do you think that that wave of momentum is now here and actually more companies are saying, you know what, it's coming, we may as well get it done now?
I mean, look, I think all things being equal, pressure drives performance, right? And there are exceptions. I mean, there are exceptions where there are some really great companies who kind of get out ahead of every issue, but generally speaking, it's pressure. And it just depends on what time or what time and what type. So, I mean, look, in some countries, if you're working in the Congo or Eritrea, yes, the pressure is going to be on the ESG, the risk mitigation angle. Are you buying from suppliers with child labor? That's going to be the pressure point. And you'll see a little more focus on things like supplier due diligence. If you, however, are operating in Canada or Australia and the focus is on economic development, the pressure is actually going to be on, demonstrating your economic value created for local communities. And so there's kind of a case in Canada right now with Baffinland iron mines, and they had an agreement with the local Inuit organization, and they had targets that they didn't meet, and they made a public report showing that they didn't meet local hiring targets, local procurement targets, and now they're kind of upping they're redoing the agreement, or they have redone the agreement and working on things. So in that case, that's the pressure that pushed them to do this better. So it really depends on the context. I mean, I'll give a shout out to a few companies in Golden Star Resources, which uses the LPRM and is a Canadian company kind of moving to Britain, headquarters wise. I mean, they're way out ahead of the game, and they see the value in this, even though, I mean, yes, there is pressure in Ghana, but they're doing it anyways. Anglo American has done a great job. Lundin Gold has. I mean, there's many companies who are going out ahead, even regardless of their level of pressure. But yes, I mean, it's fair to say pressure plays a huge role.
Brilliant. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for a warm thank you very much to Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. Brilliant.